Today we're talking about Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin. I have Jimmy Song, who's a Bitcoin developer, educator, and entrepreneur, and Chris Pacia, who's the lead backend developer at OpenBazaar. Thank you both so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you.
Wait, this is a debate. I thought this was gonna be. I was gonna get to be in a J-pop video. I guess that's all right. I gotta switch hats.
After, if you want to sing your answers, is that your J-pop hat or your debate hat?
Oh, well, it's my J-pop hat. Well, no, the other one was my J-pop hat. This I gotta switch hats a little bit. I thought I was gonna be in a video or something, but
all right, this will have to do because although it's not as good as watching you both sing and dance, I think it will be helpful.
Oh, you don't want to see that.
I kind of do, actually, Chris. I kind of do.
All right, we'll organize that. That'll be in the bloopers reel. We'll get something going there. But I do have a lot of questions for people on social media as well who are very interested in hearing your take on different issues to do with Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash. It's a really controversial issue. Every time I try to bring it up, I just get hate mail everywhere on every platform I talk about this, and from both sides as well. You know, I can't win. So I've had people say like, oh, Naomi will never be on board with Bitcoin Cash because she's in bed with the core boys and la la la. And then other people who are like, oh, Naomi, you're a scam artist because you want to talk about Bitcoin Cash and all the core people hate you now. And I just feel like there's not much constructive conversation in this space right now, people talking about these issues. So you're both very smart people, very technologically savvy. So perhaps this could be a platform for people to ask you questions and get some reasonable answers without too many ad hominems being slung back and forth. Can you handle that, both of you? I'm looking at you, Jimmy, because you're wearing the black hat right now.
Hey, I was promised a J-pop video cameo. What's going on here?
It's a bait and switch tactics. The only way to put you in.
Well, you know, I'm going to do what I need to do. But yeah, I think we could all be civil here and talk about things in a reasonable way.
Okie dokie. All right. So let's start off with the big question. Is Bitcoin Cash the real Bitcoin?
I'll let Chris answer this first.
I don't have any problem calling Bitcoin Cash just Bitcoin Cash and BTC chain Bitcoin. It's I think Bitcoin is kind of the name Bitcoin. It's a little bit of sort of like a social construct. I mean, inherently, it's kind of like a social phenomenon in terms of what chain do people follow and what have you. And I think I don't know if the question of ultimately like what is Bitcoin has been completely resolved at this point. We do have essentially two different versions of it, two different chains. And I mean, given the nature of the two, it could be, it's entirely possible, whether you think it's plausible or not, it's possible that like at some point in the future, like Bitcoin Cash could be like the chain with the most accumulated work and the largest market cap and what have you. And I mean, I don't know, are we going to call it Bitcoin at that point? You know, so one of these chains could completely go away. The other one, you know, could do really well. So I think at this point in time, I would say it's kind of appropriate to just, you know, refer to them BTC and BCH. But, you know, that could potentially change depending on how people interact with the two.
Well, I'm going to say that Bitcoin is Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash is some altcoin. I think that's a fair way to categorize the two. You know, you had a software upgrade that was backwards incompatible. And when you do that, I think I've made clear in my articles that when you do that, it's anything goes on that hard fork. And that's more or less what happened. They changed not just the block size limit, but they changed a bunch of other things. They rolled back RBF. You started using BIP 143 style, you know, SIG hashes and things like that. So I mean, they made a bunch of changes, and that's fine. They can obviously do that. They have every right. And you know, the ability to fork off is something that really wasn't tested until last year. But they did do that. But it's I think very unfair for Bitcoin Cash people to say we're now Bitcoin. It's kind of like me taking Chris's name and saying I'm the real Chris. It doesn't really make sense. I am the real
Chris, though. Just so here, I'm the real Chris Pacia. But I think what a lot of people bring up this idea of Satoshi's vision, and a lot of Bitcoin Cash people say that, well, Bitcoin Cash is closer to the original white paper. Would you say that given all of these changes, that is correct?
Was that addressed to me or Jimmy?
Both of you. I mean, Jimmy was just mentioning that there are all these changes. So I'm just wondering if you think it's an outlandish statement.
I don't know if like the white paper is like entirely relevant. I mean, you mentioned kind of Satoshi's vision. Someone the other day on like Twitter mentioned, I never kind of thought of it like this before, but I think it might be a relatively decent analogy. And that's like the difference kind of between like Satoshi and Hal Finney, right? Like the Satoshi's vision and Hal Finney's vision was like, you know, early on kind of Satoshi was asked like, you know, how's Bitcoin going to scale? And he's like, well, you know, we can handle more transactions already than what we're currently doing. You know, we have Moore's law, computers are getting faster, this sort of stuff. And then you kind of had Hal Finney, who is like, well, it doesn't scale, but it doesn't really need to, as we can just build a banking system on top of it, right? We can just have it as this like digital token, and then just build banks that use the token, and people would just kind of interact with the banks. And I mean, so kind of like right there at like day one in Bitcoin, we had this kind of like divergence in views on like scalability. And I do think that like it's kind of, I would say like the Bitcoin Core approach is much more following closely Hal Finney's vision rather than say the Satoshi one. You know, I think there's, I would say I mean, we can get into, you know, why we kind of side on the different sides in general, but in terms of like, you know, those two like separate visions that were sort of laid down in like the early days of Bitcoin, I do think at least Bitcoin Cash in terms of like how it's going to scale, maybe not necessarily in terms of 100% doctrinaire adherence to the white paper, is probably closer to Satoshi.
Right.
Well, I think Satoshi's vision doesn't necessarily matter that much, and I don't understand this deification of Satoshi. I mean, part of the best gift that Satoshi gave was disappearing, because that allowed actual decentralization to occur, because it's no longer in the hands of one creator. You can see this in a lot of other coins where the creator has sort of an outsized say on what's going on. Part of why I think Satoshi disappeared was so that Satoshi wouldn't have like as great a say, because people knew, I think he knew that, you know, people would deify whatever it was that he said. And despite the disappearance, there are people on the Bitcoin Cash side that seem to think everything that he ever said is unalterable truth, and that you can't deviate from that in any way, shape, or form. Because
the gospel according to Nakamoto.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's a decentralized platform. It's not something where you have to adhere completely to what he said, and that's you know, whatever he thought that what is the way that you should have things forever. That's just like, I mean, if you look, I'm sure, Chris, you've looked at the code that he's written, and I'm sure you're familiar with like the opcheck multisig, off by one bug, and things like that. Satoshi wasn't like the greatest coder. And in fact, if you look at the original code base, it's like complete spaghetti code. It's actually very hard to parse. Wasn't a very good engineer. Satoshi just managed to bring a few things together that in the end was a radical innovation. But that doesn't mean that Satoshi is like, you know, God over Bitcoin forever and ever. That's not what Bitcoin is. And to sort of like deify that or place that on a pedestal like a lot of Bitcoin Cash people are doing, I think is a complete aberration. It's sort of like or abomination of what Bitcoin's meant to be. And it's sort of a way for a lot of people to feel like they're following some centralized thing. The whole point of Bitcoin, the whole point of having a decentralized monetary system is so that you don't have, you know, people like that are sort of at the center. So, you know, for me, that like Satoshi's vision doesn't necessarily matter. It's now a community thing, and that's what we should continue it as.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jimmy said.
Well, that's not interesting enough, guys. You've got to bring the pyrotechnics. No, don't bring the pyrotechnics, because last time Jimmy did that, that was a crazy panel at Consensus. So just
what's happening with that video, by the way?
I think it'll come out. I'm a one-man show, right? Just have patience, my friend. Do you think that there is animosity between the two camps, Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, because people deify the figure of Satoshi, or do you think that it comes from like this winner-takes-all mentality, fixed sum game where either Bitcoin can win or Bitcoin and Cash can win, and that's why they're going at each other? Because I thought the whole idea was Bitcoin was that you could fork. You don't need complete consensus. If you don't like something, you can change it and make your own. And yet it seems that that's what happened. And instead of just letting each other go, there's just been this huge battle that's happened ever since.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the Satoshi thing. I do think you're right that there's like a winner take all mentality that goes on. I mean, for me, people are very heavily invested in all of these, right? I kind of feel like some people would probably stand to do well by diversifying a little bit, but they view like any like competitor as like a fundamental threat to their personal wealth. Some people, at least, not everybody. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to let these things just kind of like compete with each other and see where they land in the marketplace, and where they land with users. But I think a lot of that does come down to, it's like sort of like a tribalism, like my side has to win over the other side, rather than maybe both sides kind of coexisting to the extent that that happens. Another part though too, I think with the animosity comes in where like, at least I would say it was kind of a little bit worse when the two sides were together and it was just Bitcoin, because both sides felt that the other side was trying to impose their view on them and kind of like change the system in a way that they didn't want it to be changed. And I mean, you can see how that would kind of breed animosity if you were like heavily, emotionally invested, financially invested in a system, and then people are trying to change it in a way that you think will actively make it worse. But now that there is this split, I don't think there's as much, or at least there needs to be as much of that kind of animosity, because like, I'm happy to allow, the Bitcoin people to implement their vision and just run with it,
Right.
Yeah, and I would agree with Chris on almost everything that he said. Just, there is this animosity between the two camps, in part because of the tribalism, but a lot of it is because people like Roger Ver are going around and saying Bitcoin Cash is the real Bitcoin. And he's like kind of stirring up trouble, right? Like he bought Bitcoin.com. He's telling people that Bitcoin Cash is the real Bitcoin, and like sort of inviting lawsuits and things like that. And that's obviously going to stir up trouble. And in part, I can see his strategy because, when you have, two sides like this and you're the underdog, which I think by market cap and everything else, Bitcoin Cash certainly seems to be, you need to pick a fight, right? This is the Jay-Z rule of social media or whatever, which is you pick a fight against the king as a way to legitimize yourself. And I think he's been actually pretty successful. And but that a lot of that animosity, in other words, is manufactured as a way to, get more people invested into Bitcoin Cash. That said, like, all of this, and I think what Chris is saying is right. It was a lot worse during the scaling debate than it is now. And part of that is because, the communities have split. You're not really allowed to have in-between opinions anymore. You kind of have to choose. There's no, like one side, like half of one side, half of the other as much anymore. And as a result, it's gone more towards extremes. I guess we could talk more about how societally we tend to be much more tribal nowadays than we used to be in the past. And this may be reflective in the culture around Bitcoin right now. But I mean, regardless, I'm glad that the Bitcoin Cash people split off, because it is a voluntary network. And if you don't want to stay, no one's forcing you to. And the fact that they split is a very good thing, because like Chris said, you let the market decide where it's going. And that's better than, endlessly fighting about it and making it a political thing.
So security risks, people talk about a 51% attack. And we've just seen Zencash, they got attacks. They have 11,000 nodes, but these are not necessarily mining nodes. So like what is the main reason why people are saying that Bitcoin Cash is inherently insecure, and is that a valid concern?
Well, I do think it's a bit of a valid concern. I think we have, Bitcoin Cash has, I don't know, I should have looked it up, but it's what, maybe 10 to 15% of the hashing power, somewhere in that neighborhood.
It usually follows price ratio very, very closely.
Yeah. So, that leads to a scenario where you could have like a single Bitcoin mining pool has enough hashing power to like 51% attack Bitcoin Cash. And so, I mean, yeah, that is, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and also I think it was Charlie Lee who put out that report recently saying exactly how much it would cost for a 1 hour attack on all the different coins. And it's just like, it was crazy. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was like 80,000 for 1 hour on Bitcoin Cash. It's like 600,000 for Bitcoin. Of course, it might take longer than an hour, and whether there are economic incentives for people to actually do that, considering it can just be rolled back immediately. But do you think it's a valid concern people have about the 51% attack?
Yeah, with maybe a couple caveats, but I mean, normally I would tell people, in Bitcoin, we tell people wait for, maybe 6 confirmations or something like this to, before you consider a transaction to be final. On Bitcoin Cash, I would probably say wait a lot more than 6, right? I mean, maybe 60 before you consider a transaction to be final, just because there is that possibility that the chain could be overwritten by, a malicious actor. Now, the caveats there are a couple things. One, while it's like, it is a single mining pool could 51% attack Bitcoin Cash, in the Bitcoin chain, it's like, maybe 3 of them could band together and 51% attack Bitcoin, right? Now, the reason why we typically said that's not a huge concern of ours, it is a concern, but not maybe like the biggest concern, is because the mining pools don't control the individual hardware. And so we'd at least like to think, and maybe this wouldn't happen, but we'd like to think that the miners would probably switch to a pool that's not actively being malicious if the pools that they're using started behaving that way. And so in that context, I don't know, like if a pool decided to 51% attack Bitcoin Cash, would the miners just stick in that pool and let it happen, or would they leave and go elsewhere? That's kind of like an open question. But something that just we could talk about the big news from a couple of days ago, Jimmy looks like was part of, is, Matt Corallo put out this new mining protocol, which I think is really great. It's something I was actually working on something around the same time for Bitcoin Cash, a similar type protocol. But the idea would be that like individual miners could kind of select their own transactions rather than outsourcing the transaction selection to a pool. And I think that would make that type of 51% attack like dramatically harder, because now it's not, you don't need 2 or 3 mining pools to band together to do a 51% attack. Now you might need hundreds of individual miners to do so. So it's, I think that's like excellent work. I saw Jimmy's name was mentioned in there from doing some review. So maybe he could talk about that. But I think that kind of, if that was widely deployed and that's what all miners were doing, then I think that type of attack would be a little bit harder. Now, it could be the case that maybe there is a single miner. I don't know. We don't have a whole lot of visibility into like how much hashing power these individual farms have. There could be an individual mining farm that has more than 50% of Bitcoin Cash's hashing power. But it could also be the case that like maybe the largest farm only has like 1% of the hashing power or something like this. Maybe Jimmy knows the numbers a little bit better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I had a show with Matt Corallo a couple days ago, and I encourage you guys to go and watch it on YouTube. But we talked about Better Hash and all of the protocols around that. And Chris is right. Like, if you have Better Hash, then the individual miner gets to decide what sort of block, what transactions are included in the block, and so on, instead of the mining pool. The two things, variance, decreasing variance, and creating like the transactions of a block really should be separated. Right now they're conflated together where they really shouldn't be. There's no reason to be. It's just that there isn't a protocol to do it. So that will reduce the attackability of various pools. But that said, Bitcoin Cash is obviously a lot more vulnerable than Bitcoin because it has much less hashing power. Right now, it has about like 15%, and that means that anyone with somewhere around the 8 to 10% of Bitcoin's hashing power can go and short Bitcoin Cash if they can, and then run some sort of a double spending attack or something to that effect, and really like attack Bitcoin Cash. The fact that that hasn't happened yet tells you that there's either no real easy way to go short Bitcoin Cash, or not everyone's this Nietzschean ethic kind of people that will do anything for a profit, which I happen to believe is part of the social anti-fragility of Bitcoin in general. Is that you have people that aren't like completely ruthless, like, and trying to gain power at any cost. If there were, I think Bitcoin Cash would have already been attacked, and a lot of things would have happened there. But anyway, with regard to the security of Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin, the hashing power obviously matters, and the fact that they're on the same proof of work algorithm means that Bitcoin Cash is significantly more vulnerable. And I think Chris is alluding to the fact that, yeah, you should probably wait a lot longer. Fact of the matter is a lot of people don't. And people like Roger Ver go around telling people that, zero confirmation transactions should always go through. And that's the way it should be. I think it sort of speaks to a naivete and his understanding of the technical aspect of Bitcoin. And, I've seen this with him plenty of times where, he just sort of blurts out stuff that really, shows his misunderstanding of what Bitcoin really is, and even what Bitcoin Cash is. So I think we're both in agreement that, Bitcoin Cash is significantly more vulnerable. How that plays out, though, is a very difficult question. And, how much that affects you is also a difficult question. For me, the biggest thing besides hashing power and 51% attacks that make me hesitant, like if Bitcoin didn't exist and it was just Bitcoin Cash, I don't think I would be invested in Bitcoin Cash, in large part because, Bitcoin Cash has a very centralized development team. As far as I can tell, it's mostly Debunking, that's benevolent dictator for life or something that does everything on Bitcoin ABC. He decided sort of almost unilaterally, as far as I could tell, re-enable a bunch of opcodes that no one was using or was clamoring for, increase the block size even more, even though like none of it is being used. Just stuff like that, which I don't really like. If you're going to have a dictator, why are you using cryptocurrency in the first place? You can just have the Federal Reserve be your dictator.
Yeah, I mean, regarding the hashing, I think for like long-term stability, Bitcoin Cash is going to need to get closer to parity with Bitcoin in terms of hashing power. I mean, maybe not like more than 50%, but it's probably 60-40, something along those lines, for more long-term stability. As far as like, I don't know, Debunking, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's not. In Bitcoin ABC, there's probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 full-time people working on it, and a couple other part-time contributors. And then you have, like the Bitcoin Unlimited team has like, I think 3 or 4 full-time people, working on that. And the recent hard forks were like a kind of a collaboration between all of them, and not really like Debunking just saying this is the way it's going to be. So I mean that's just one kind of correction I would make. I mean, I certainly Bitcoin Cash doesn't have the number of developers at this point that Bitcoin does, but it's not just Debunking at this point.
Well, I mean, you may say that, but at least from the outside looking in, it seems like he gets whatever he wants, and that's kind of a de facto dictator for life, right? Like kind of like what Linus gets whatever he wants in Linux. They might have a lot of contributors, but that's what it seems like.
I don't know if like, I don't think Amari was like the primary driver behind like the re-enabling of the opcodes. I don't know. It didn't seem, it seemed like he was like okay with it but not like, it wasn't like him pushing it.
Okay. Well, I mean, still need, if he's still the gatekeeper, he's still the gatekeeper. I don't know. I don't think it's really, that will get proved out with time. And if he strongly opposes something and it still gets in, then I'll start believing what you're saying. But if he's going to continue to be for pretty much like only stuff that gets in is stuff that he's for, then I think it's going to look to the outside at least. I don't know what the reality is on the inside. Like he controls it, and this is how I know Ethereum is controlled by Vitalik. He pretty much if he doesn't agree with a particular feature, it doesn't happen. That's what I've noticed about Ethereum, and I think
that I mean, a lot of people do mention this centralized nature of Bitcoin Cash, and I wonder to what extent that is true. I know someone asked on social media to talk about the estimated difficulty adjustment, suggesting that there's something fishy going on there, or something opaque going on there, or it's manipulated in some way. Is there any validity to that concern?
I haven't seen anything, but I mean, I wouldn't put, I don't know, like that's their business. I'm not really involved in the Bitcoin Cash development or anything.
No, I think I know what he's referring to. So when they had the initial fork that split away from Bitcoin, just in order to ensure that Bitcoin could survive the difficulty adjustment, Amaury put in this change to the difficulty adjustment algorithm so that like if it went a certain amount of time without any block being found, it automatically adjusted downwards. And it was a little bit of a half-baked algorithm. It was not like ideal, kind of like ideal long-term difficulty adjustment algorithm. And as a result of that, it seemed like there was situations where kind of like, I forget exactly what happened, but like the mining, the difficulty would drop and then miners would rush in and drive up the difficulty real high and mine a ton of coins. And then it would drop again and then it would rush up and they'd mine a bunch of coins. And I think people were saying that like this was, I think we're like you're kind of alluding to a little bit of a conspiracy here, like where it's like the miners did this intentionally to try and mine a bunch of coins. I don't think that was really the case. I think it was just a matter of, he didn't have a whole lot of time to like plan out the difficulty adjustment algorithm, and that was like what he came up with at the time. And then subsequently later they did change it, so now you don't have those kind of wild swings like that.
Right, they had to have another hard fork to fix that, in part because like Chris was saying, it was a half-baked idea, and I don't think anybody really played through the game theory scenarios of all the incentives that were in play. If miners were incentivized basically to not mine for 12 hours at a time so that the difficulty adjustment, the difficulty would come down, and then they can go in and mine a ton of blocks. I think at one point it was like 100 blocks in a single hour, just because everybody just jumped on because it was so quick. The difficulty was just so easy. And then as soon as the 2016 difficulty ramped it back up, they would leave for nice 12-hour stretches and then mine a few blocks, and then they can do that again. And that cycle was happening. But regardless, this is the problem with a lot of centralized development. You don't catch cases like this, right? Like you don't understand. There wasn't enough review put into this stuff or much testing, and that's that's sort of the difference in development philosophy, I think, between the two camps, is that Bitcoin Cash is willing to be more experimental, and Bitcoin, I think, is more concerned about making sure that you don't have weird stuff like that could absolutely completely ruin the network. And and this is Bitcoin. I would characterize Bitcoin Cash's development philosophy as closer to that of Ethereum, where they're just sort of creating new features, seeing what happens without necessarily going through and analyzing every single aspect of what they might do, what that might do to that economy. And, like with monetary policy, you have to be absolutely careful. And you need not look further than the Fed and like how much, a point 0.05% rise in the Fed funds rate like ends up affecting the entire economy. So, you got to be very careful with this stuff. And I think the Bitcoin development philosophy is the correct one for that reason.
And I mean, I understand the philosophy of not wanting to move fast and break things, which is sort of the startup mantra. But I think that a lot of people agree that, a small block increase doesn't actually have much of effect on security. At least that's what my understanding is. So my question also from social media would be, why was Core opposed to increasing the block size even by 1 megabyte?
Well,
are they waiting for Lightning to play out? Because the consequence was a lot of merchants left the space. They stopped using Bitcoin. That's a lot of hard work that some people feel was wasted there.
Well, so I think the characterization, why couldn't they? Well, they didn't have the power to, right? In order to do a hard fork, you need to have everyone upgrade at the same time, or else you have some people on one chain and some people on another, and so on. You don't, people seem to want to place Core as the centralized entity that gets to dictate whatever they want to the community. It's totally not the case. They don't have that power. They can't just say, hey, we're going to all do this, because that would be centralized. And that's not what Bitcoin is. And even within the Core community, there's a ton of different opinions, and you can't force something in if there are reviewers that are giving knacks to these things. It's only when there's enough when there's a consensus on the code changes that you can do it. So I guess you could have done something with extension blocks or something like that to increase the block size in a soft forky way so that it's backwards compatible. But that didn't really go anywhere, right? Purse.io, they made the extension blocks proposal, but nobody really wanted to support that, and that didn't go anywhere. So, first of all, Core doesn't have that power that a lot of people seem to claim that it does. It does not.
Would you say that most of those people were vocally opposed to any sort of increase, or would you think it was mixed?
I think it was mixed. I mean, Peter Wolla put out like BIP 103 or something like that, and it was his plan to increase the block size in a reasonable way based on how much bandwidth was increasing every year. And he had this proposal. It would be 1.25 megabytes after the first year, and then 1.4 after, or 1.5 after the second year, and so on. That never went anywhere either, because there were enough devs. And this is Peter Wolla, right? He's rewritten significant portions of the Bitcoin core code, and his proposal got shot down. That's evidence for you that no single person controls Bitcoin.
Well, and
right.
So, I mean, my perspective on this though is it's true that there wasn't a consensus, but for the blocks for the 2 megabyte, but there was. I mean, certainly within industry, certainly within the vast majority of the big exchanges, and I think I would say a lot of users too. People were willing to do the 2 megabytes as part of the SegWit 2x thing, and it seemed from my perspective the only holdouts was the core developers. So it's kind of if the core as a group said, okay, we're going to get on board, I think it would have happened, right? I think it was the fact that they held out and said we're going to put our foot down and say no, that it didn't happen.
Yeah, well, I see that whole 2x thing as from a different light. To me, that was a bunch of businesses saying that we represent the users, where they really didn't. I mean, Eric Voorhees and Peter Smith and all of these people that were CEOs of these big Bitcoin businesses, they were going out there saying, well, our users want this, and we saw in the futures market that absolutely was not the case. There were people betting against the 2x hard fork and saying, you know what, this is what the businesses want, but the users have a different opinion. And I think a lot of core devs saw that, right? You can't force things down people's throats. And this is something that I've talked at length about, is that, when government and business get together in sort of a normal, in the US, for example, or some other place, they usually encourage some sort of consumption. And for me, what The 2X agreement was just a bunch of businesses saying we represent the entire economy of Bitcoin, and we are going to create a governance around this that's based on us. And that was completely unfair to the users. And the users kind of struck back. And even if it was the core developers that were holding back or whatever, I think they were doing it for a very good reason, because they didn't think it was safe. They didn't think it was right to force everyone to upgrade. They didn't think and they have very good reasons for doing so. And the fact that the businesses didn't win, I think, was the big driver of the big price increase last year. Was that, if the businesses don't control this thing, then this is really, really like something that's not going to change, right? Like, because in American politics, you get a bunch of businesses together with a lot of money, they can pretty much pass any law they want. And that wasn't the case in Bitcoin. And that proved the resilience and almost like an anti-fragility against governance takeover, which is what I saw the whole 2X agreement as. It was more about businesses trying to take over Bitcoin and sort of dictate it, and for good reason, right? Like, because SegWit is hard to implement. There's a lot of new tech that they had to add. A 2 megabyte size increase would have meant that they didn't have to upgrade any of their systems. Just update the full node that they were running so that it accepted valid blocks. And the thing is, like, because they didn't get it, what ended up happening, especially December, January, and February, was that they all optimized, to like use multi-output single batch transactions and SegWit and all this stuff. And what do we see? Well, the fees are dropping like crazy because it's mostly businesses that use up the block space. And that clicked for me at some point, and this is when I wrote like the crypto Keynesian crypto Austrian thing, is that a lot of these businesses were taking up a lot of the block space. So of course they wanted just the simplest thing that would get them the more business or more profit or whatever. Whereas, a more long-term view, instead of like a 6-month view, which a lot of these businesses have, the users were thinking 10, 20 years down the line. And from a 10, 20-year perspective, Lightning is way more important. And making sure that you have an upgrade path using something like SegWit is much, much more desirable than just increasing the block size, which is the laziest but most business-friendly way. But you don't want to necessarily accommodate the businesses and save them from doing a lot of work just because it hits their bottom line for 6 months. You want to go for the long term, and that I think the users chose correctly.
Well, I mean, this might be an area where it would probably help to have some empirical data on the number of users, because it seems like we're kind of both speculating. But like, from my perspective, when you use the term users, it seemed like we're referring to maybe a couple thousand people. Like, it wasn't the loud voices that were opposing this was not like.
Well, I mean, it isn't a democracy. It isn't about the number of people. It's about the holders and how much each of them have. And it's and from futures markets, we saw, like, that's very empirical data. It was like 75-25 at its best. And it went down from there to something like 90-10, something like that.
Yeah, but at the same time, you have like blockchain.info with like, I don't know, 10 million or whatever they have users, and I would probably venture to guess like maybe 1% of them had an opinion on the block size, right? Like, they just wanted something that would work.
Well, I mean, the people on there also hold very little amounts of money. So like, if you're using blockchain.info to hold more than like 5 Bitcoins, you're an idiot. And I think most of the people that use that wallet actually didn't hold that much. The people that held like lots of money were on other services. And I mean, maybe they do represent them, but it's also unfair to be like, okay, because blockchain.info has 10 million users, all 10 million vote the way that blockchain.info wants. There's plenty of people that didn't agree with them that had wallets on there that moved them off.
Oh, I'm sure there were. I mean, but I don't know. It to me, like the absolute number of like dissenters seemed like it was relatively small to me.
I mean, that's complete speculation. We do have objective metrics in futures markets, and that indicated, as far as anyone can tell, that's the only reasonable objective metric, and that was very clearly in favor of not increasing block size.
I don't know how objective that is, though. Like
it's the most objective that we have out of everything that we had. It's you're not going to get anything better out of a Twitter poll or some proof of stake using Rogers Bitcoin.com. That's not those have no skin in the game.
Well, no,
with
but
actual futures markets, you have skin in the game.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we can go back on it. I'd have to go back and look up what was going on with them anyway to fully.
So we'll talk about that in our follow-up when we get all of the questions saying, oh, Chris and Jimmy are both idiots, la, 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 and giving all their questions, which is going to happen. Now, Jimmy, you mentioned that it's the hard fork was the lazy way to do things. Some people say that it's also the cleanest way to do things as well.
Well, for a business, yeah, but for the future growth of Bitcoin, absolutely not. I mean,
in terms of future growth, you're talking about something that's sustainable. So you don't just want to keep.
Well, you don't fix transaction malleability at all. You don't. You still have the quadratic hashing problem. You don't have an upgrade path like you do with SegWit. You don't. And the block size increase would need to hard fork again in order to keep going. And you're so like sort of from a future perspective. If you use the 2 megabyte block size increase as a one-time increase, which was what everyone in the 2x agreement basically signed off on, that's kicking the can down the road, because you're probably going to have to do another block size increase as a hard fork and force everyone to upgrade. With SegWit, you have SegWit version 0 with the witness program of a particular type. That increased it to 2 megabyte blocks. A lot of people forget that. It's also a block size increase. But you also have this ability to go to SegWit version 1 and add new abilities like Schnorr signatures and masked and graph-root and all this other stuff as version 1. Version 2, you can use Musig and like really interesting tech that's privacy preserving. You maybe even eventually even get to like confidential transactions. You don't have that with this hard fork path. And from a long-term perspective, it was the laziest and stupidest way to go about things, because the only people that benefit are really the businesses that were clamoring for more business and cheaper fees so they could keep doing whatever they were doing. And the fact that they were forced to upgrade and use transaction batching and SegWit and stuff like that, that's been a very good thing, because that means they had to go and upgrade all of their systems. You don't get like super crazy bit rot that I suspect Coinbase and blockchain.info and all of these companies actually had. You actually had them creating updated services and stuff. And the thing, if you've studied like financial institutions at all, they tend to be very, very conservative, and they don't upgrade their systems, and they suffer. Like Citibank has like a room full of people still taking fax orders and entering those orders into like mainframe computers, right? Like you don't want that for Bitcoin. That's more or less the equivalent that we would have had with a block size increase, that a straight 2 megabyte block size increase. Instead, we had better systems, longer term systems that we can utilize for all sorts of things in the future with SegWit. That like I think a 2 megabyte size increase was the wrong way to do.
So I think that a lot of people. I think that a lot of people, and you seem to believe that SegWit created all of these other benefits, and that's why it was the better path, and that long-term benefits as well. But a lot of people have this sort of straw man argument, this red herring of, well, 2 megabytes is inherently insecure. That's why we didn't go that route. So what you're saying is that's not the reason.
A hard fork upgrade is inherently insecure, because you're going to split the chain, right, from all the people that don't upgrade. And that was why, not necessarily like that 2 megabytes is like so large and everything else. You can't force everyone to upgrade. And that was why. That's why it's insecure, because you split the chain at that point.
And Chris, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. It's in terms of like, hard fork, soft fork, and all of this stuff. I mean, a lot of those optimizations are kind of nice, the Schnorr signatures and MAST and this sort of stuff, but they're not going to get you like anywhere close to the type of scale that and usability that you'd like to see long term, right? So I mean, it seems like...
Well, you don't know that. I mean, you don't know what innovations you can put on top of those things. I mean, that's speculation or sort of dismissing a tech out of hand. You don't know.
Well, I mean, from the ones you named, we know you're going to get to maybe about like, you know, assuming 100% usage, you're going to get up to about like 2.5 megabytes or somewhere around there.
No, you also have Lightning on top of stuff like once you fix transaction malleability, you have the ability to do Lightning very well. And Lightning, you know, I mean, the sky's the limit on that one because not everyone has to hear about everything. That's a very insincere argument in my mind. Like, oh, you're not going to get the same. You're not going to fix it with this amazing scaling thing. So we have to do it our way. That's kind of a.
No, I mean, you're talking Lightning, and you're making this assumption that it's this amazing thing, and maybe it is, but it's still. Maybe it isn't, right? And so you're kind of like have this like fundamental assumption that like you guys have solved it with Lightning.
No. I'm making no such assumption, but it allows you to try that stuff. And there's a lot of other paths in which we can go now that we have the ability to have like at least 15 more versions of SegWit, right? With the Witness program version 1, version 2, or whatever, you can keep going, and you can have different optimizations, you have an upgrade path that's very clear with that. Whereas with the 2 megabyte increase, it's you have to hard fork over and over again. It's not sustainable.
That I do agree with. I think the large part of the reason why the 2 megabyte was just this like, you know, it just did not sit well with a lot of people was because it was a compromise that nobody wanted on like either side. And it was like, you are, Jimmy's absolutely right. You are going to have to do like hard forks later on if you did that, which is why, you know, we didn't go to like 2 megabytes on Bitcoin Cash, for example.
Now, talking about Lightning networks, so what happens as more and more transactions happen off-chain and as block rewards get smaller and smaller? How do miners respond? Did they get rewarded for mining? And do you think that they're going to be like, are they going to have to rely more and more on transaction fees as the block rewards go down? And is that going to be enough income? What do you see in the future there?
Well, I think that's an economics thing. Basically, the incentives are still there for them to mine because you get transaction fees off of the channels closing. And those absolutely have to go through or else you can have your money stolen. So the fees on those will tend to be higher. But regardless of all of that, it's just, you know, we're speculating on the future based on sort of a linear extrapolation of the present. And that's almost never a very accurate assumption. Almost always when you're thinking about these things, new variables come in, new things happen where, you know, speculating about what happens as the fee reward runs out. I think it's in about 10 years, you're going to have like 1.675 or something like that, like very little reward relative to the fees. And who knows how that plays out? Because you can try to figure out the incentives and find the Nash equilibrium and stuff. But all of that changes as soon as you add like one small variable, like often in dramatic ways. So I don't worry too much about that because the market tends to find these equilibrium points without much trouble. If it's not profitable for certain miners to mine, they'll stop. And equipment manufacturing will slow, and you know, people will keep using equipment that's like 5 years old or something. And if it's the other way, then they'll keep pushing the boundaries of Moore's law or whatever, and try to make this not Moore's law, whatever the processing law is, and try to make ASICs even faster and push the boundaries of like 7 nanometer lithography processes for processors and go down even further. I mean, innovation is extremely difficult to predict, and that tends to be the driver of a lot of this stuff. And I don't think we need to speculate that much on that. We know the market's very good at finding equilibrium points, and that has worked so far, and I don't see that really changing unless there's an artificial, barrier that people put in as far as, how much this costs or whatever, or monopolies and stuff. I mean, that could affect things, but that's another discussion entirely. Chris,
do you have anything to add to that?
No, not really. I think that's mostly okay. But I mean, one possible, and I think Jimmy's kind of alluding to just saying like we don't know, but like, one possible outcome that you're going to have is if you need to replace the current block reward with just fees. I mean, you're looking at some pretty big fees there, right? Even to open a Lightning channel, you're probably looking at $50 to $100 fees just to replace the current block reward. At, if that's all you can do is the current transaction volume. And so I don't know, is that going to be like a type of system that people want to use where you have a big fee to open a channel?
Well, I mean, if you have the multi-channel opening, so right now all payment channels are just one-to-one, but they have proposals for multi-channel, right? Like you can open one transaction and it's actually like 10 to 10 or something like that. And you can optimize that way, and you can spread the cost of Lightning channel opening among like 10 parties instead of 2. There are ways to make this cheaper. And again, this is where trying to predict the innovation that might come in the future as a result of the pricing pressure that's here today is very speculative. And linear projections are almost never correct for that reason. I mean, you might say, okay, well, we can project this out and it'll be $50 to $80 per person that's doing it. Well, if you have multi-channel and you just have like, 100 channels opening with the same transaction, that price might come down drastically. And there are other ways to do off-chain where if the pricing point doesn't make sense for certain users, there's an arbitrage opportunity for businesses to get in there and offer smaller ones, but represent them in some trustless way, and I don't know, maybe use sidechains or something, and create value for everybody. Because if there's a nice fat profit margin there, then businesses are going to come in and do that. So again, like these like projections of, well, now everyone's going to have to pay $50, so no one's going to use it. I think that's really silly. You got to think about the possible innovations that could happen, and ways that businesses can make money, and that's only as limited as human creativity itself. And I think that's a very poor assumption to make.
But see, this is kind of like, I think a large part of the reason why we have this community split is like, we have a system that works pretty darn well, that we know had been working really well since 2009. And we're kind of being told we need to replace it with something that we have frankly no idea how it's going to work, or if it's going to work. And so we're just kind of like crossing our fingers and,
No, we have no idea if a hard fork would work. In fact, that's the most dangerous thing that you can possibly do. And in fact, when Bitcoin Cash, after the Bitcoin Cash hard fork, almost every hard fork of every altcoin is now experiencing this thing where there's people that will keep the original chain alive and split them now. Like that if you want to go down that route and say this has been working well, therefore we should just increase the 2 megabyte blocks. Well, the actual act of making it 2 megabyte blocks requires this brand new thing that we have no idea how anything will go, and that's that doesn't make any sense.
Well, no, I mean, if you have 1% of users split off and say, okay, we're going to keep the chain alive, then they keep the chain alive. I mean, that's kind of like...
Well, you don't know what the split's going to be, do you? And like that if it's like 1 in 99, it might be one sort of thing. And by no means is it guaranteed to make it so that the 99% will win forever and ever. There are other like trade-offs besides the majority of economic value going towards one chain that you have to think about, especially long term. That's not taken into account there. So I like this idea that
But the opposite is you actually, the act of not trying to split the chain, you actually caused the chain split, right? Because like a portion of the community forked
But
off.
it was voluntary, not involuntary. If you force everyone to upgrade, then that's an involuntary
no, that's not
thing.
involuntary. People who want to stay with the original chain, it's voluntary, right? People are making a voluntary choice to go with the 2 megabyte chain, and some people make a voluntary choice to stay with the
that's kind of like saying, okay, the US is going to tax you at 90%. You can voluntarily leave. I mean, it's a very different thing when when the default is that you have to upgrade. That's very different. And I think that's and you know from like programming and stuff, the default matters. And if you make the default a particular way, that changes the system completely. So that's it. The whole debate here is about like what's safer, a hard fork or trying new stuff and allowing more innovation to come in. I think allowing more innovation to come in through soft forks and having an upgrade path and all of this stuff that gets fixed with the result of SegWit is the right way instead of a lazy
innovation, way. A lot of people in the Bitcoin Cash community would say, well, there's more innovation going on over there. That's something that Roger Ver mentioned in my interview with him.
And since when is he an expert technically? Because as far as I can tell, he doesn't understand a lot of stuff. Yeah, I totally disagree with Roger Ver. The guy doesn't, he's not very technical.
So taking Roger out of the picture, would you disagree with the people in the Bitcoin Cash community who say that there's a lot of innovation going on in there that you don't see in Bitcoin?
Most of the quote unquote innovation seems to be we can pay small amounts for a very low fee. And this is true. It's not really innovation because you could do the same thing on Litecoin, Dogecoin, or whatever, right? Like, because they don't get used. Yeah, of course you have tons of space and you can do stupid things like make the Twitter clone that puts the tweet on the Bitcoin Cash. I think it's like called memo.cash or something like that. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. That to me is Bitcoin Cash going more towards Ethereum, making themselves everything to everybody and not being good at anything in particular. And if that's the direction they want to go, that's great. Let's let the market figure that out. Bitcoin is all about sound money and making sure that you preserve your wealth through across time and space. Whereas Bitcoin Cash is trying to be all sorts of different things to all sorts of different people.
Now, someone asked, Alex Pickett asked, what would Bitcoin Cash have to do for Jimmy to endorse it? I think we already know the response to that. But Jimmy, what would they have to do? And do you still own your Bitcoin Cash from the fork?
Well, I have to admit, I've been getting greedy on trying to get a nice high price for my Bitcoin Cash. So I do own some. I'm trying to dump them, but...
You heard it here, guys.
Yeah.
Song is a Bitcoin Cash holder.
Yeah, I think I've revealed that before. I think I've revealed that before.
You could have dumped that 3,000. 3,000 would have given you a nice little profit there.
Yeah, I didn't dump enough. I was like conservative and I only dumped a little bit when that happened.
So that means you're projecting that it's going to go up.
No, I'm just holding on to it for a particular pump because I know how volatile this stuff is. But that said, like, what would it take for me to go over there? I don't know. I can't think of anything in particular, but nor do I know all possible futures at this point. If I did, then I could probably answer that better. So, yeah.
And Chris, directed at you, which projects do you think in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem are most promising right now, in your opinion? Do you like this ridiculous Twitter clone that Jimmy is just completely on?
I saw that question too. Someone posted, and I was thinking, I don't know if I have a really like great answer. I mean, to me, I'm more interested in like money rather than like apps kind of being built. But I don't know. There's in terms of like memo, it's kind of fun now that there's not a whole lot of transaction volume on Bitcoin Cash, but I do agree. I don't know if that's like a long-term, I don't think that's like a long-term sustainable thing. I mean, I don't think, certainly if it became like Twitter size, I don't think it would be viable.
But you guys can get 1 gigabyte blocks. Peter Risen told me.
Maybe.
1 terabyte.
Is it a terabyte block? I thought it was a gigabyte block.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Sorry, keep going.
No, I don't know. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. I think it's still kind of early days to kind of be predicting, or which apps are going to be doing well.
Right. Any other tech questions that you think are important that people have brought up that you think need some debunking?
I think the whole like Jihan coin thing is pretty misleading. I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I'm pretty involved in Jihan's not really like involved in development or pulling strings and this sort of stuff. I mean, I know people say it's like, Jihan's pet project, but I mean, from my perspective, it seems like other than him being a supporter, like he's not the ones like making, writing code, deciding what gets in, what doesn't get in, that sort of stuff. We have, like I said, several full-time developers on ABC and several on Unlimited, and then a bunch of contributors on top of that. And those seem to be the people who are more having an effect on the direction that the network goes rather than Jihan.
Well, I mean, I think that's not necessarily what people are saying. I do know he's funding a lot of Bitcoin Cash projects, and he's sort of a supporter, as you say. But if you're pouring a lot of money into something, you're not necessarily doing it just to, see them like sort of defy your will towards something. Generally, this is how influence is gained, is by, putting money towards things. And from what I'm hearing between him and Roger, they fund a ton of projects, almost anything Bitcoin Cash related, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that personally because Jihan did give us at OpenBazaar money for our last round. And I mean, there's been like no telling us, how to build OpenBazaar.
Okay, but say you guys said, all right, we're not going to support Bitcoin Cash anymore. Do you think he'd be happy?
Well, I mean, I think he probably invested because he doesn't think that's going to happen.
That's, I think, well, I mean, you don't ever really want to go against the will of your investors, but now you're like kind of locked into that path now, aren't you? Because if you defy your investor who's like heavily into Bitcoin Cash, and you say, well, you know what, Bitcoin Cash is giving us, like, I don't know if this is true or not, but hypothetically, if like maybe 0.1% of your revenue came from Bitcoin Cash purchases, and and it was costing you more than that in operation costs to keep supporting it, and you made the rational decision to get rid of it, would he be happy? Or would you feel more like obligated towards supporting it because he is invested in your project? Right. I mean, I don't know if he has a seat on your board, but this is the sort of thing that I think people are concerned about.
Yeah, I don't think he does.
Okay.
So the last two questions. So in a nutshell, is Bitcoin Cash a scam? Because I get that all the time. Bitcoin Cash is a scam. To me, it just seems like a fork, right?
Yeah, I mean, like the vast majority of people in Bitcoin Cash are honest people who are into it for the tech and who want to see, the properties of Bitcoin, fast, cheap, censorship resistant, peer-to-peer, remain in place. I mean, I wouldn't be participating in something I felt was a scam, right? And I think there are quite a few other people like that as well. I mean, people can, not be happy with Roger's marketing attempt, but I don't think that's like, makes the whole thing a scam, and everyone who participates in it. I mean, that to me, like, I don't know. I mean, people who know me, it's like the last thing I would do is like scam people. And I don't know. I almost kind of find that a little offensive when people suggest I'm participating in scamming people.
Right. And then on that note, and Jimmy, I'll let you answer that as well in a second. And that note, everyone who says that Roger Ver is a scam artist, like obviously there's some misleading things on bitcoin.com saying Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin. Would you say that he's a scam artist, or do you think that he genuinely believes that Bitcoin Cash is the future of cryptocurrency and the best choice there?
All right, so let me start with the scam question. It really depends on how you define scam. There were probably employees of Enron that were very sincere, didn't think that they were doing anything wrong, and did, good work for them or whatever, doesn't mean that they didn't participate in a scam. So it's entirely possible for
scam.
Huh?
So you think
no. I just want to start off with the preposition that it doesn't mean just because you yourself aren't a scammer doesn't mean that you are not participating in one. It's entirely possible to do that. Now, is Bitcoin Cash a scam? Depends on your definition of scam, right? Like I know, for example, that Craig Wright is a scammer, right? Absolutely 100% convinced. And I am utterly confused why any cash developer or anybody involved.
That confuses me too. Like, why not just
how he has any say in that community whatsoever, given his history, given how much of a scammer he is, why anyone chooses to even have a photo taken with him is beyond my comprehension. If anybody in Bitcoin,
Satoshi, apparently he's the real Satoshi, Jimmy.
If anybody did that in Bitcoin, if anyone claimed to be Satoshi, couldn't prove it, and was involved in any way, shape, or form, there would be nobody that would be like, okay, this guy's the real thing. They would be ostracized immediately. The fact that Craig S. Wright continues to not be ostracized, I think, gives credence to this idea that Bitcoin Cash is a scam. Now, I don't know if it's a scam as in like BitConnect, where, like you go and make an actual pyramid scheme or anything like that. I don't know. But, there are levels of scamminess, right? Like the fact that Roger Ver goes around and telling people Bitcoin Cash is the real Bitcoin or
right, but you're now talking about two people who are involved in promoting Bitcoin Cash. I'm talking about the actual coin. Do you think the tech is a scam? Do you think,
yeah, the tech is, I think they exist legitimately. Right. I think it exists legitimately because there were a bunch of people that wanted to, that didn't like the direction that Bitcoin was going. So they decided to make their own coin, which is completely in their right to do. So in that way, it's not a scam. The naming, the continued sort of embracement of a scammer, that, like stuff like that, I think is very, very much falls in the scam category, including a lot of what Roger does. Now, as far as Roger Ver and his motivations, I haven't been able to figure him out, and I've tried. And I've even had him on my show and talked about things with him. And I don't. It's entirely possible he's just a very sincere but very misled person, or he can be a very devious person that's putting up a front as a way to, deceive people into giving, making it his own. I'm not going to make that character judgment necessarily.
And that's the hard thing in the space as well, because I also being a staunch libertarian, I know Roger from libertarian days, like he gave $1 million to FEE, an organization that I think is awesome. So knowing like his ideological roots, that he really genuinely desperately wants a more free world, and having chatted to him about this, I personally believe he's very sincere. Whether he's making the correct choice by doing all these renaming, I think that's clear.
Well, regardless, that's between
bad marketing.
Yeah, regardless, that's between him and his conscience, and I'm not gonna speculate on that. The only thing that we can really judge him on are his actions, and his actions are very fraudulent and scammy as far as I can tell. So if that's the case, then yeah, he's a scammer. If you're doing fraudulent things, even if your intention was not to be fraudulent, I think you're still a fraud, right? Like, and he might be sincere in doing that, but
So could it be that his definition of what Bitcoin is just differs from yours? So if he's saying that this is the real Bitcoin, do you think that that's inherently false? Therefore, that makes him a scam artist?
Of course it's inherently false. It's not Bitcoin. Is that the
reason that he's a scam artist? Because if his fundamental understanding of what Bitcoin is just different.
Yeah, it's hard to speculate on intent, and I try not to go in that direction, right? Like I try not to say, okay, well, he obviously knows X, Y, and Z. Whoops, sorry.
Stop throwing things around.
All right, hopefully you can cut that out.
He's getting passionate, and
my hand went there. Whatever his beliefs are, again, that's between him and his conscience. I'll let him settle that with his own conscience or whatever he believes in. But as far as his actions, yeah, they are fraudulent because he's going and telling people that it's Bitcoin when it's really not. The truth is, it's a hard fork of Bitcoin. It's more or less a new coin with a particular ledger entries that happen to match whatever Bitcoin was at block 49 something. So I like that to me is fraudulent, and that makes him a scammer. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, any last take on that?
No, but I mean, if for people who are like concerned about it being a scam, I would just say, like, I have like almost no interest in onboarding investors at this point. Like, I'd want to onboard users, right? Merchants, people using cryptocurrency. So it's not, I mean, there's nothing to, in my opinion, I've got nothing to scam people with. If I'm even saying, like, I don't need people like speculating on this. Like, we want users.
Right. So the final question, who do you think is behaving worse in this whole debate? Because you've got like your cult of core versus the scammy altcoiners right now. And I've experienced vitriol from both sides. And it just like, and I have really close friends who I have huge amounts of respect for, who are from both camps, who are constantly posting about how the other side is the one doing all of the bad things. And I wonder, like, have they got blinders on? Like, who do you think is worse in this? And what do you think next steps are? And is this just going to write itself out?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think me and Jimmy probably give the same answer because we experience it directly. So it's, yeah. I think when you experience something directly, and I don't know if it's necessarily blinders as much as it's like, for every one thing I see someone else saying that's not right, I get like 50 directed in my direction. So it's but it's probably Jimmy probably sees the same thing. So. I mean, there's no reason why people need to be, asses to each other on the internet, but sadly it seems like
that's what the internet's for.
Exactly.
Well, I have a slightly different take on this. A lot of people complain about the incivility around crypto, and I'm not so sure it's a bad thing, right? Like the fact that people are shouting at each other or insulting each other on Twitter. If you read Nassim Taleb's last book about skin in the game, he makes this argument, you need pressure release valves like this. You need a little bit of, sort of localized volatility so that you don't have giant black swan events. And if you think about it sort of from a social perspective, where is it like illegal to do like public insults and stuff like that? Well, it was largely like Arab countries and stuff. And what happened there? Well, it got to a boiling point, and then like Arab Spring happened, right? If you try to minimize volatility, you actually end up making the system more fragile. And what I think is happening with all of this fighting and stuff, it allows a lot of that pressure to release itself, because you have local volatility, but that prevents sort of global, drastic, complete black swan events that happen as a result of fragilizing the entire thing. So I don't see that as a bad thing. I want people to be sort of releasing their pent-up frustration or whatever at the other side or whatever, and like in the end that ends up being a good thing. And of course we'd like to be in a more civil world where people are nicer to each other and there are unicorns and rainbows or whatever.
Everyone is Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, Samson Mao's Canadian. I think you should.
What?
Yeah, there's a lot of Canadians on Twitter, but
I don't even believe it.
Well, the localized volatility is actually a good thing, and I like. Sure, it sucks when it happens to you that people are insulting you and saying stuff. I personally have this philosophy where if that's the worst thing they could do, then I should count my blessings, because in the past you were murdered for saying stuff, or like things were robbed from you, your kids were kidnapped or something, and I'd much rather have them say something bad about my hat on Twitter than like whatever else. And that I think it's actually a very effective release valve. And I like, a lot of people complain about it as if it's this thing that should never exist in civilized society. I think civilized society in that way is a short path to socialism and things of that nature. So I don't care. I think this insults and incivility or whatever, they're all good things. Bring it on. Keep it coming.
All right. Any last words, Chris?
No, we'll leave it with Jimmy.
All right. Although the internet seems like a terribly dangerous channel for these things, because when you're saying things anonymously over a computer, it gets pretty crazy out there. But ultimately, I agree, free speech is a good thing, and we'll just try and weather the storm that always comes in battles between these two camps. Well, thank you both so much for chatting with me. I think this has been really helpful. If anyone has any more questions they want to know, maybe we could do this again later down the track. I know things are probably going to change for both camps. So as technology advances, more innovation comes along. So for now, thank you so much for chatting with me, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next time we're gonna do a J-pop video, right?
Well, when you wear the J-pop hat, all right.
What does a J-pop men's hat look like? I don't even know.
Listen, you got to use your imagination. Maybe we can put that to the internet. So we're running a competition. Who can design for me the best J-pop hat for our next encounter, and he will wear it. We will have it made, the winner made, and he will wear it for the next interview. How's that sound?
There we go.
Yeah. Hey, when's this coming out? I mean, like, I'm still waiting for the consensus video, so I'm a little nervous asking about how.
The consensus video. It has to be a surprise. All right. There's a big announcement that you made in that segment.
The consensus video?
Yeah, that was a huge announcement.
Yeah, but a lot of people already know about it.
What? You've been telling other people about your new ICO?
Oh no, not that one. The other one. The other one. The one from stage. No, the ICO one. We
CoinDesk about that one.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on with that.
All right, everyone tweet CoinDesk and ask where their videos are. I
know, seriously, right? Like but the new announcement, you got that'll be hilarious.
You keep it under wraps. All right.
Yeah, well, it's under wraps. Yeah, it's under wraps.
All right, well, you just destroyed my nice, clean ending, but let's do it again. Thank you so much, and you're awesome.
Thanks, Sam.
I'm a Bitcoin bear and I'm scaring the status quo. Got that crypto going at that foul upload. And the algorithm gon' get them until prison send us all to prison. And that's a nerdy living. I'm a Bitcoin bear and I'm scaring the status quo. Got that crypto going at that foul upload. And the algorithm gon' get them until prison send